RealAgriculture.com's presentation of Unlocking Innovation, a national call to action, is brought to you by Bioenterprise Canada. Shaun Haney here with Real Agriculture, and I'm joined, of course, by the CEO of Bioenterprise. It is Dave Smardon. Dave, how are we doing?
I'm doing well, Shaun. Thanks for having me. This is going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is exciting because this is a big, this is a big issue. And I was just going to say, I knew that, there was a lot of work to do in the innovation space in Canada. And I had the opportunity to, we're going to go through, talk a little bit about the process that I was a part of with Bioenterprise and other stakeholders over the past 18 months. I guess, the organization has released a paper, Canada's Path to Becoming an Agri-Food Innovation Superpower, and it's a national call to action. Okay, that phrase, national call to action, it sounds a little bit alarming. Are there reasons to sound the alarms, Dave?
Yeah, there absolutely are. Absolutely. Bioenterprise has been around since 2003. So we've been working with innovation in this sector for a great many years. And during that time, we have experienced a lot of the inadequacies of the Canadian innovation ecosystem as it pertains to agriculture and food technologies. And so if you talk to other people, and we have done this in the past, and we've done it very recently, and I'm sure, Shaun, you've had these conversations as well, everybody comes to some very similar conclusions. And the conclusions are that it's not good enough. What we do in Canada from a standpoint of finding innovation, developing innovation through research, and then trying to get that innovation into the marketplace for the benefit of Canadian agriculture is not good enough. And we can often sit here and say, well, things are going pretty well. We get money from the government to do research and we move forward and no one's really hurting. But at the end of the day, not good enough means not good enough, right? We are now being compared globally with what's going on in China, what's going on in Brazil, what's going on in various pockets of Europe. And we are continually, year over year, falling behind these countries. So we need change. We need significant change in order for us to maintain a globally competitive position in agriculture.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to be, based on the report, what we're doing is we're going to be releasing a 6-part podcast series. This is episode 1 to kind of, set the stage here. And what we'll be doing throughout the next 5 episodes is really diving into the recommendations that came out of that report that was produced from a series of roundtables. What did we do? 6 across the country from coast to coast? We had
6 plus a couple in Ottawa.
Yeah, and we had anywhere, if you look at the ones that led up to that final report meeting that was in Ottawa, we probably had 20 people for sure, maybe 30 at each of them, stakeholders from across the ag innovation ecosystem space. So people that participated were farmers, venture capitalists, people that work inside of government. Who are some examples of other stakeholders that we had?
Well, we had a lot of the ecosystem players. So the incubators, the accelerators, those who are tasked with finding the innovation and attempting to get it into the marketplace, quickly and efficiently, through government funding programs. So the people who operated the government funding programs, they were there as well. So it's very important for us to have people who have the experience in the ecosystem, working with the ecosystem, working with government programs, to come back and say, here's my experience. This is what I felt I benefited from. Here's where I felt the gaps were. And we had quite a number of entrepreneurs, agricultural and food tech entrepreneurs who participated in those roundtables, who had just very recently experienced these systems. So that we're not dealing with dated information. We're dealing with stuff that's occurred, in the last 2 years.
Yeah. The recommendations that came out, I think you're right. I even post roundtables, I've heard from a number of different stakeholders like, hey, they weren't even participating. Like, hey, this is a problem. Like, yeah, exactly. This is, I think the results or the some of the issues are quite well known. Everything from regulatory to connectivity, in the sense that this country is extremely fragmented across the ag ecosystem space. So, I guess let's narrow in on what exactly is the when you say ag ecosystem, like the ag innovation ecosystem, what exactly is that? What are we talking about here?
Sure. So if you look at the development of something that is innovative, if it's something you can touch or it's a process, whatever it may be, it typically gets developed or may get developed early enough in the university community by a group of researchers. And then often as it comes to the end of its research and development cycle, it goes into what we call applied research. So maybe it goes to the community colleges where they actually are going to do some testing and some piloting of these types of innovations. And then it's also going to be interacting with various incubators and accelerators that exist across the country who are going to provide some form of funding, some form of knowledge and experience in the sector, the mentorship programs. And then you get into the investors, and including in the investors are also corporations who may have an interest in this technology or this innovation. So all of those pieces represent the components of the ecosystem. And then sitting off to the side here are the government funding programs that are in place to support the movement of that innovation, whether it be early days research or into the commercialization and adoption process towards the end. So we try to take all those pieces and wrap them up into a circle and call it the agricultural innovation ecosystem.
And at the end of the day, we're looking to obviously foster capital investment from inside the country and outside. You know, being Canada a great place to invest and try to fund this kind of innovation. And also the farmer, right? Making sure the farmer's very concerned in these times about productivity and efficiency, and the way that you increase that productivity in agriculture is through one of the paths to that is through innovation, newer ways of doing things. Now that could be ideas, that could be services, that could be systems, that could be products. There's a lot of different ways to encapsulate that. And hit it from all different angles. But at the end of the day, this is really benefiting not only primary agriculture, but a number of different stakeholders throughout the chain.
Absolutely. And Shaun, if I can take you back just for a moment, when we talk about, you mentioned earlier, fragmentation of the ecosystem. Yeah. And so if you look at what does that really mean? Well, the ecosystem that we have in place today is fragmented. It's insular. And by insular, it means that you're typically focusing on your region, your province. So you're interested in companies that are in a specific region, companies that may have an opportunity to grow, employ more people, generate more revenues for that region. But in doing so, the organizations that support those companies, moving them into commercialization, adoption, and furthermore, those organizations are only focused on that region. So there is very little effort that goes into looking at Canada or looking at beyond Canada. How do I sell internationally? And so what happens as a result of all of this insularity is a lack of knowledge of what's going on in the rest of the country, a lack of knowledge of the experience and resources that may be available in some other part of our country, but you don't know about them. And that goes into a lack of collaboration and cooperation because you don't know that you should be collaborating or cooperating. Yeah. And so you've heard the point before, that causes us to look like 13 different countries, right? The programs that are in place in British Columbia cannot be accessed by an entrepreneur in Quebec, and something in Saskatchewan cannot be accessed by somebody in Ontario. So by nature of having this incredibly fragmented system, we are creating impediments for these innovations to get to market quickly and efficiently. And if you look at what's going on internationally, there are many countries that used to have fragmented systems, the United Kingdom being one, France being another, Brazil being a third. And they went from having multiple numbers of players through multiple regions to having an overarching organization that was designed to make sure that the necessary resources, funding, expertise, and so on was available all across their countries, not just on a region by region basis. And that's what we have been striving for here in Canada. But our system isn't set up that way. So it's important for us to recognize that. And as you pointed out, as you talk to people across the country, they all get it. They all say, "Yeah, it's a huge problem, but we don't know what to do to address it." So the roundtables that you referenced were exactly designed for that, not just to identify what the issues were region by region, but take those regionalities and say, is this something that is characteristic of all of Canada? And if it is, what are the recommendations that we need to establish to address these issues?
Yeah.
And that's where we are today, is we've been able to find those recommendations. And instead of producing a report, which we have done, and letting it get filed in a filing cabinet somewhere, we as a group, all the people who attended these roundtables, and it's expanded beyond that now, we as a group are going after the government and others to say, we are not going to give up on this. We need to make the changes, and we're going to get started on them as soon as possible. And we have done that. We have gotten started on some of them now.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and Canada is it's a very large landmass. Arable acres are, in some contexts considerable, but in other contexts not. 40 million people population. That is all the context of what we are trying to work within here. And it presents opportunity, but it also does present some real challenges, and what the solutions for one country may not be the solutions for others. So for example, how the US does it, they have advantages and disadvantages, doesn't mean that that's exactly how Canada should do it, or even comparing to Europe or Israel or Australia or whatever. If we can take some of the best parts of those different geographies and bring that in, we can make a Canadian-based solution. So we mentioned the geographical, the lack of collaboration and connectivity amongst the different jurisdictions. We also have issues around the regulatory system. That was point number 2, which that'll, in a future episode, that will produce some very interesting rants from a couple of our stakeholders who will join us on that podcast. Resources and support for the entrepreneur or the innovator, making sure that we're giving them access to the tools, the knowledge, the skills to be able to forge ahead with that innovation. Of course, in order to have innovation, Dave, you have to have investment in funding. And I already mentioned capital earlier. And of course, since we did the roundtables, Farm Credit Canada was one of the participants and funders of these roundtables. They've stepped up with a lot of money to invest in innovation in the country. So those are the 4 major areas or pillars, I guess, and inside of those, there's a bunch of recommendations in those headers. So that some of the people watching this may be like, well, that doesn't sound too bad. We can fix that. It's not that simple, Dave, right?
No, it's not. I mean, first of all, it's not that organizations and people don't want to collaborate, don't want to cooperate, and aren't interested in what's best for Canada. That's not the case at all. The question is, how do you do it? How do I cooperate with a greater ecosystem when I don't even know who's out there? I don't even know who's doing what. So part of this is knowledge dissemination across the country as to who is the best at doing one particular thing. Who's the best at regulatory experience and moving something through the regulatory system? Who's the best at assessing a biological innovation? That can be maybe it's a natural-based pesticide. Who's the best at doing that? And so we can't all develop this expertise individually across the country. If we did, every organization would have 500 employees. So what we have to do is we have to recognize who's best at what, get them into this ecosystem so that everyone knows about this expertise, and we can all use it for the benefit of the country, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's part of it has, as you and I have talked in the past, part of it's a bit of a cultural issue, because Canadians don't tend to think big. We tend to think a little small. Let's, I have a nice product. I could sell it here in the prairies, no problem, and I could make a decent lifestyle. But what we're really after are impactful innovations that could have not just national impact, but global impact. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about making Canada a global superpower. And to your point earlier, we have all the land. We have agriculture experience across the country with a variety of diversified products. We have research institutes that can be compared on any nature with similar institutes around the world. So we have all these components. We're just missing that last piece.
Mm. So you travel around the world. I'm always curious about the way that other countries do things relative to the Canadian way, so to speak. I'm also a lot of times interested in talking to people outside of the echo chamber, in this case, the borders of Canada, in terms of how the Canadian system is viewed. So when you go to Brazil for a ag innovation summit of some sort, or name any other country that would do something like that, how is Canada viewed as a place to innovate in?
Canada's viewed, very positively as a place to innovate. I mean, one of the things that people know about Canada is, they know about our universities, they know about our research, but they also know about the support that the government gives to the agriculture sector. Now, that support may not all be for innovation, but the point is that the agriculture sector is deemed to be incredibly important to Canada. It is from a GDP standpoint and from an export standpoint. And so that position globally is well recognized around the world.
Mm.
Where we fall flat in our face to some degree, and this is something that the Global Innovation Report, they have them every few years. The
Yep.
Global Innovation Report, it focused on the fact that on one side, Canada is in the top 10 globally in agriculture research. And it's based on a very complex formula. Part of it is the per capita, part of it is the number of patents we have, and so on and so forth. But I think we were number 8, and that's something we should all be very proud of. But when it comes to taking the innovation that results from that research and moving into the marketplace, we fell down the scale to number 21.
Ooh.
And so that was just, I think, if I get my countries right, I think it was just ahead of Italy and just behind Slovenia. So when you look at how important agriculture is to Canada, there's a huge disconnect when we are now being compared with Slovenia, Italy, and a few other European countries. We should be in the top 10 in agricultural innovation, adoption, and commercialization. And so that identifies those 26 gaps across those 4 areas that you mentioned, to say, if we started to solve and address these gaps, we could climb up that ladder from the 21st position. It's not going to happen overnight, but you could get into, number 18, number 14, and eventually be where we should be.
So why does that commercialization gap exist?
Well, it comes back to the fact that we aren't focused enough on the commercialization adoption piece. And I must go back to something you said earlier and apologize for not identifying the entire farming producing community as part of the ecosystem, because they are one of the most critical components. And one of the reasons that Canada hasn't done a very good job here, aside from, the fragmentation issue, is we do not embrace the farming community at the very earliest stage in developing innovation. We have a lot of innovations that have been developed by people from other industries, the high-tech industry, AI solutions, robotics, sensor technologies, biochemicals. And yet some of these entrepreneurs have never been on a farm. They have a really good what they think is a really good idea, but that idea has not been proven out. Now, if you had a farmer, or let's say multiple farmers, because that's what it would typically take. You have multiple farmers involved in looking at the idea behind that innovation at the earliest stage. And they would say, "You're not addressing my issue," or "This is exactly what I need. We need to move this forward." And you maintain the experience of the farmer all the way along that innovation development process. If we did that, by the time it got to the commercialization stage, you would have no issue finding farmers that wanted to pilot this technology and this innovation. No issue at all. But because they are not part of the process, someone comes in out of the blue and says, "Hey, I've got this wonderful innovation. Do you want to try it?" And they go, "I don't think so."
Right.
Right? So that's one of the biggest issues that we have, the disconnect that we have with the whole farming community. And we are trying to address that right now.
Yeah, and I think based on just the structure and operation of agriculture, it does present some challenges in that example that you gave. So in the case of like a dairy farm, you're milking every day. It's a little bit like an auto plant. So that kind of testing is maybe a little bit easier, or there's more efficacy for it, as long as there's, for sure safety to it's not going to disrupt milk production. But in the case of cropping, broadacre agriculture, let's say it's some sort of innovation around planting or seeding time.
Mhm.
You've only got one turn per year. And so it's that creates a barrier in itself, where it's like, and especially with the weather, weather variability, and that being a constraint, and just labor, you're trying to get the crop in as quickly as you possibly and timely as you can. So the nature of agriculture, I think, is a little bit of a barrier for innovators too, that maybe some of them, especially if they have a solution, but they're not from the industry, that may be a bit of a hill for them to climb mentally, to kind of understand that is a factor.
Absolutely, and that's where the ecosystem has to come in. If one of the things that came out of the round tables across the country, and we asked the question, if you have an entrepreneur, they come to the table with this interesting innovation, and you need to reach out to the farming community to get them involved, are you in a position to do that? And the vast majority of organizations that were in the round table says, "No, we don't know who the farmers are, particularly the ones who are most innovative." And the farming producer organizations that exist across the country, I won't name any, but in general terms, they are not mandated to move innovation into the farming community. It's not part of their raison d'etre. So there's that gap. So what you have is farmers that don't know what the innovations are available to them, don't know how to get them, and don't know how to implement them, and haven't been involved from the get-go, so there's a high risk. And then you have the entrepreneurs that don't know how to get to the farming community. Who are the corn farmers? Who are the grain farmers? Who are the beef farmers that I could talk to? So that's that disconnection. That's that fragmentation, in a heartbeat.
Dave, something, I just want to go back to the root of some of this. There may be people in the audience that are like, okay, listen, I feel that we need government to get out of the way. I don't think we can orchestrate industrial policy to like force Canada to be a more innovative place. Why do I care about that? Or do I want my tax dollars to go to that? There's innovation other places. If the innovation works and it's successful, it's going to come here anyways. It's like, why is it important that Canada has a thriving ag innovation ecosystem?
Well, if you look at what's happening today and in the current geopolitical climate, we are subject to tariffs, significant tariffs from our friends south of the border, and now we have the Chinese that have just hit us with some significant canola tariffs as well. The greater that we can be self-sufficient, the better off we are. So from the standpoint of, use an example, dairy, and you have the same thing in the brewery industry as well. So we produce aluminum in Quebec. That raw aluminum goes into the United States, and it gets processed, and what we buy back are drums, aluminum drums used in the dairy industry. We buy beer cans back with the beer tops that are used in the brewing industry. We don't produce any of that ourselves. So the price of producing dairy products is going up simply because we've got tariffs on those aluminum products that we are acquiring. And it's a double tariff because it's the tariff that moves the aluminum into the United States and the tariff of the product, the finished products coming back. So first and foremost is you want to become more self-sufficient. And one of the best ways of reducing your costs, increasing your efficiencies, and ultimately becoming self-sufficient is the adoption of innovation. And if we aren't good at adopting innovation, both creating it and adopting it, we're falling behind. Mm. Then if you move that into food security, you look at the chicken industry. The United States has had aviation flu. We import a lot of our parent chickens from the United States. So if those breeder farms get aviation flu significantly enough, it impacts the chicken industry, it impacts our ability to have chicken, it impacts the price of chicken. So there's a lot of different areas as you work through the various subsectors of agriculture where there are opportunities to become more self-sufficient, where we are increasing our own food security and decreasing our reliance on foreign products.
Currently, we have a lot of calls to action. Yeah. This is one piece of that, right? So whether it's trade infrastructure or you trade diversification or artificial intelligence. So this is looking at it from an ag ecosystem or ag innovation ecosystem space, ag tech. Is there any worry that there's too much on the we gotta do plate? And how do we ensure that this topic in particular, maybe not the front of the pack, but it's close to the front in relation to some of the other calls to action that are out there for this Carney government?
Yeah, I mean, look, we are competing with natural resources and energy. We're competing with armed forces and so on. But the other thing that we're looking at, I mean, we now have a minister who's in charge of artificial intelligence. So the focus of the federal government is changing, and one of the significant pieces that is changing to is a focus on growth of companies, growth of the economy. And so you work your way back and you say, well, what are the sectors that are the most important in Canada? Well, people are going to throw the darts at the auto sector, the energy sector, and the agriculture sector. Those are the three biggies. And so if you break it down, you look at they may be the activities may be different for each sector. But we have a pretty good playbook for the agriculture sector. And you've alluded to a number of calls to action that have been out there, even just within the agriculture sector. Yeah. The research community has gotten together to try and figure out how do they do research better? How do they collaborate better? We got our roundtable together to look at post-research opportunities. So one of the things that needs to happen is a sharing of this information so that there is a continuum and an understanding of what needs to happen from the very early stage of the research call to action all the way up through the commercialization and adoption call to actions as well. And we're not far from that. I think the fact that these things are ongoing and taking place so recently, and the information is so new. I mean, even though the recommendations are old, the fact that we're doing it, in the last 6 months to a year is very important. So this is a groundswell of activity that's taking place, and Carney is seeing this, and the Ministry of Agriculture is seeing that, and ISED is seeing this. So the federal government is certainly recognizing what needs to happen in the agriculture sector in order to make us globally competitive.
Dave, let's just put our crystal ball here, and chess pieces line up. Yep. We find the intestinal fortitude to take action and make some change. What does success look like?
Well, I think from my standpoint, success is a clear coming together of the ecosystem, where collaboration, instead of being an afterthought, is on the front burner of every organization, and that they all recognize the benefits of being able to share information and share resources across the country, and then the result of that is that you're going to have innovations from startup companies and high growth companies coming through that system and being tracked from the earliest of days all the way through to the end so that we all know where they are at any point in time and that they're getting the right support system in place for them, the right services, the right resources. And at the end of it, at the end of that, when they come out that funnel, they've been funded by the investment community and they're a going concern and they're selling internationally. That is not difficult to do. It, you know, it requires a lot of collaboration and cooperation from coast to coast. And I think we're going to get there, but it's, as you say, it's a lot of work. And the government can play a very big role here. We don't want the government to just keep throwing money at all of this, but the government can be a catalyst. There are things that the government can do that when they design new programs, collaboration, cooperation are built into those programs. You must be able to show and prove that you are collaborating across the ecosystem across the country. You must be able to show that you're sharing resources. You must have similar objectives across the country. One of the things that I'll go back to very, very quickly is, I mentioned the fragmentation and operating like different 13 different countries.
Yeah.
One of the issues we have here is that the ecosystem and what we do is often measured in terms of economic development and not national economic development so much as it is regional, provincial. And instead, you should take the economic development piece and push it off to the side, because this is not just general economic development. This is an important long-term agricultural innovation strategy. And so, it has to be viewed in that nature. It's a long-term strategy for Canada's agriculture sector. And so it takes it out of the more traditional, it's a small time economic development issue and we're going to do piecemeal to move things forward. This is more than piecemeal. This is, as you said earlier, this is changing the way we do things. It's turning it on its side.
Okay, so let's take the other fork in the road, the other path. So instead of going right to the ideal outcome, let's turn left in the fork. Nothing changes. What? And I don't want to be trying to create scenario, doomsday person, or trying to be hyperbolic here. But what does that exactly look like?
Well, what you're describing is complacency, and complacency is that we get our money from the government, we get our research dollars, we get our innovation dollars, we spend them as best as we can, but ultimately we're never going to have the kind of successes that other countries have. As an aside, we see lots of companies coming to us from the Netherlands, from Israel, from the UK, that have a much more robust ecosystem, and they are in a much better position to do business internationally than most of our startup companies are. So, the complacency means that we're thinking things are good enough, and we just carry on. The ultimate result of that is we are going to fall behind, and you can't avoid that. There's innovation that's coming out of China. China is a real country to worry about, and you have other countries that never used to even be on the radar screen, and they're there now. Brazil, for example, which has always been a large agriculture producer, is now tops in innovation as well. And you've got small countries like Switzerland are knocking the ball out of the park when it comes to innovation. So, it's complacency doesn't even allow us to compete on that front.
The report is Canada's path to becoming an agri-food innovation superpower. It is a national call to action. And Dave and I have 5 more episodes that'll be continuing this conversation. And here's the best part. Not just the two of us, Dave. We're bringing in some of the stakeholders that participated in the roundtables that we chatted about throughout the country. And we're going to get their perspectives and bring them, those perspectives were heard in those roundtables. We're going to bring them to the entire audience now and really kind of break down some of these critical action steps with a lot more clarity and a little bit building them out with a little bit more scope to make sure everybody understands what is going on. So, Dave, I'm really looking forward to this, and I think it's going to be a very, very insightful series that we're doing here.
I am too, Shaun. It's great that we're going to have some of these participants from the roundtables in our sessions. They're opinionated. They've experienced what it's like to work through the Canadian ecosystem, and they will not hold back on their comments and their recommendations. So it's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Great stuff. If you have any feedback or thoughts at all on this topic, on what is happening or what needs to happen to really make Canada, an overused word maybe at this time, but a real superpower when it comes to ag tech innovation, please send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Dave, thanks a lot. We'll chat with you soon.
Thanks, Shaun. Take care.